So now you've learned a little bit about Microsoft 365, the different options that you have, the different subscriptions that you can purchase and licenses. You've learned a little bit about the migration tools and how you migrate to Microsoft 365. And now you're ready to start setting up your Microsoft 365 environment so that it's ready for the migration and that it's ready to include and contain all of your resources. So one of the first things that we need to do in Microsoft 365 and set up our identity. Who are we? Well, in the world of Microsoft 365, our organizational identity is defined by our domain name. And your domain name is going to be used for many things. It's going to be used for your users to sign into their environment. It's going to be used for your email addresses of your user accounts, the email addresses of your groups. The URLs that are going to be used to access your SharePoint sites, your Microsoft Team resources, all of it will be defined by your domain. Once you purchase a domain name, you register it in that global name resolution system that actually resolves name to IP addresses so that your domain name has an identity and a location somewhere on the internet. So we're going to buy a domain name and then say that the location is Microsoft 365. The entry point for all of our emails, all of our SharePoint libraries, all of our resources is going to be Microsoft 365. So we need to tell Microsoft 365 about that domain. And how do we do that? Well, we do that from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. A funny thing that happens is that actually that interface for adding the domains is not visible by default. Click on Show All in order to see all of the options here on the left-hand side, and a new option opens up which is called Settings. When I go into the Settings option, the first option is Domains. Now here is where I'm going to add a domain. You can add many domains, you can have many identities that represent you as part of Microsoft 365. So in order to add a domain, I'm going to click here on Add a Domain. If I've already purchased my domain, purchasing the domain means that you've gone to a registrar and you've provided a proof that you are allowed to own that name and you are the only person with that name. It is a globally unique name, for example Microsoft.com. Only one entity can own Microsoft.com and can be represented as Microsoft.com throughout the entire world. So if I have another name that I want to register or buy, I can click on Buy a Domain Name, specify a domain name here, provide a credit card, and that domain is now mine. As part of this process, Microsoft 365, after you've purchased it, will also register your name through DNS. Again, that global name resolution solution that's going to allow that name that you've just purchased to have a physical location, an IP address that maps to it. In the early days of Microsoft 365, when you clicked on the Buy a Domain option, you would be automatically redirected to GoDaddy.com, the registrar that Microsoft had a partnership with. Today, you click on Buy a Domain and you're purchasing everything directly from Microsoft. If you've already purchased a domain, you would click on Add a Domain and then you would be adding an existing domain that you've already bought. And in this field here, I can put any domain such as Google.com if I want to. I don't own Google.com as you've probably guessed already, but the first process is to add the domain. The second process is going to be to verify the domain. I've added Microsoft.com over here. Now when I add Microsoft.com, it actually allows me to add the domain. But here my setup is incomplete. Why? Because I haven't verified to Microsoft 365 that I own Microsoft.com, because I don't, and no way to verify that. There's no way for me to prove that I own it. I cannot create email addresses with the Microsoft.com domain. I cannot use it. I have a domain here which is called netlogon.com, which is marked as healthy because it was verified. It was verified through a DNS system as well. I actually created a special record in DNS that allowed Microsoft 365 to verify that I own that domain marked as healthy. I can create users that have those email addresses with the netlogon.com domain. I can have groups, I can publish apps. I have all of these structures that are in place that can now use that domain because it is managed at Microsoft 365, because I've marked that domain as an entry point within Microsoft 365. So the domain will be really one of the first elements you put in place once you configure your subscription. I should highlight the fact that as soon as you create a subscription, there is a domain that gets created for you which has a onmicrosoft.com suffix. So it ends with onmicrosoft.com and it's a default domain so that you can at least start working in Microsoft 365 before you add and register your domain. So domain names, very important. You'll also be able to move domains. If you have a domain that's registered with someone else, or maybe in a different entity as part of your migration process, you will be able to change the settings of your domain in DNS to then move it to Microsoft 365.